What's up, guys? It's the Thought Decoder, and thank you for joining me on my channel. Here, I teach you logic. I teach aspiring apologists to state and clearly defend their faith. This channel is kind of like a school. It's kind of like an educational platform because I study different material. My goal is to become a Christian apologist, where you deal with issues of worldview, social issues, and you compare those issues to the Christian faith. And what you try to do is see what is the Christian response to different problems within society. Whether those issues are the relationship between science and faith, social issues of what policies to support and advocate for within society, and moral issues on how to live personally, what choices and issues of philosophical issues, etc., etc. So almost every branch of study, every discipline, within the academy that you can think of, there is an apologetic dimension to that. If you're a Christian, you can pursue study in one of those areas and defend the faith from attack. So, I said all that to say this, that Alvin Plantinga, in his paper, and I also have it on his channel, it's 20 years of the SCP, Society of Christian Philosophers. He says that Christian scholars should seek to defend the faith using the skill set and the tools of academia. So if you're a psychologist, you want to defend the faith from a psychologist's perspective. You want to be doing experiments, et cetera, using the scientific method to produce data and to basically to look at the evidence that supports the Christian view of whatever study you're dealing with, what it means to be human or what it means to be a person. If you're a philosopher, this means studying philosophy using the tools of philosophers. William Lane Craig, another famed and notable, eminent Christian philosopher, theologian, and apologist, writes in his advice to Christian scholars, to aspiring Christian scholars, that you should pursue a doctorate in whatever area you're intending to study. One should pursue a doctorate in that area. And so I think that's good advice, and I'm currently pursuing a doctorate in an area of study in philosophy. And today, what I want to do is I want to take a look at my essay that I'm developing. Want to go through it and want to study some more of God overall. It's what I'm basing my writing sample off of, and just kind of see what we can add to it and what we can change. And I can take you along my process and my thinking, and so you can see how it's done, or how I'm doing it, this project more specifically. So William Lane Craig has recently, if you follow him, you know that he studies these different topics, and he's been doing it for years, because I think he planned to do a systematic theology where he surveys a variety of philosophical, theological topics and issues, and his positions and the best arguments and the best positions he thinks the most defensible from a Christian perspective. He does that in the book as well. So that's what he says. He's so recently he sought to defend the faith from the perspective of God and abstract objects. If you watch my channel, you will have seen me dealing with this recently with my guest scholar, Dr. J.P. Moreland, He was on the channel, and we talked about God and abstract objects. This is a subject also that William Lane Craig is covering as well. So you'll see so you'll definitely see me dealing with this today. Okay, let me get my setup here. Alrighty. Okay, so now some of the difficulties that I'm having writing this this essay, I'll just let you know, is that when you're writing an essay, especially for like a PhD or something like that, the typical wisdom for writing doesn't seem like it fits, especially when you're writing philosophy. It's not like you could start with an introduction and have an attention getter and then make sure your thesis is there, et cetera, et cetera. It's a certain amount of research that you need to do. So I guess in a way, what I'm writing is really my analysis of the book, and then later, after my analysis, I'll see what I can argue for, given my analysis of Dr. Craig's work. So let's get into my paper and show you what I've written so far. Okay, so I'm calling this God. Calling this God, abstract objects, in divine conceptualism. And this is, when I say this is raw, this is really raw. Like I just typed it up, hadn't edited or revised it or anything like that. I'm really in the process of cultivating it and working it out, et cetera, et cetera. So, and what my method was, I was just reading it and taking notes, and so it's more like my notes and like a summary of his reasoning, et cetera. I don't know why I keep saying et cetera. So let's start. William Lane Craig, a praised Christian philosopher and theologian, has turned his career-long study of the coherence of God to another challenge to the Christian worldview. He has recently completed this study and said that it lasted for 10 years. Craig has released 2 books related to God and the existence of abstract objects, 1 God and Abstract Objects, and 2 God Over All. The latter is said to be a popular level text, while the former is the more detailed study. Dr. Craig begins by framing the problem. There are 2 doctrines that seem to conflict with Platonism: aseity and creation. The doctrine of aseity claims that God doesn't exist by virtue of something else. His existence doesn't imply the existence of anything outside of himself. Further, it is taught that this attribute isn't shared with any other existing thing. Aseity, therefore, is incommunicable. Thus, we can summarize the first step of Craig's thinking as such. If God is ase and his aseity is incommunicable, then nothing outside of God has an independent existence. Next, Craig sees the doctrine of creation as teaching that God created everything except for himself. Thus, we can conclude the following. If the doctrine of creation is true, then everything that exists besides God has been created. Furthermore, Platonism entails that there are ideas of forms, or they're ideas or forms. These ideas are not created, thus they are uncreated. If true, then Platonism directly contradicts the doctrine of creation and aseity. Thus, if Platonism is true, then it is not the case that nothing outside of God has an independent existence, and it's not the case that everything that exists besides God has been created. The truth of Platonism, then, implies the falsehood of divine aseity. and creation, respectively. Thus, Platonism is in direct contradiction to both divine aseity and creation. In Chapter 1, Dr. Craig examines the scriptural backing for the doctrine of creation he espouses. Predictably, he quotes the prologue of the Gospel of John. I don't know why I put predictably there, but I'm just, like, it just seems predictable that that's where you would go. Like, if you're a Christian and you want to argue that God created everything, or you can go to Genesis 1. But in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. Put a one there. That's my footnote, and in my footnote I just cited my source, Craig 2016, pages 13, 14. Craig interprets this prologue to teach A, that God alone is I say, and B, all other things were created by God. And I quote him. At face value, then, John's prologue is pregnant with metaphysical implications, for it implies that God alone exists eternally and I say. Okay, the third verse is admittedly said to be a universally quantified statement. All things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being. However, he uses the context to infer that God and his word are excluded from this quantifier. Thus, although this verse presents a universal quantifier, the context of the verse, charitably understood, suggests a restricted domain of the quantifier. Now, obviously, the class of things John is talking about is wholly unrestricted. Okay? We could add to the list another restricted member of the domain. The Gospel of John describes the indwelling of the Holy Spirit as equivalent to Christ living in them. Now, I stopped because now obviously the class of things John is talking about is not wholly unrestricted. Okay, I didn't say not. Okay. Okay. So basically he's saying that John, when he says all things were created by him, then he doesn't mean himself, right? And then he doesn't mean the word, because it says in the beginning they were there. Then I would ask the Father, and he will give you another. Okay, we can add to the list another restricted member of the domain. The Gospel of John describes the indwelling of the Holy Spirit as equivalent to Christ living in them. Then I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate to be with you forever. So my thinking here is, you can argue that the Holy Spirit, if it's eternal, and it's the Spirit of God, and God sends it just like he sent Christ, and the Spirit's going to be with them forever. And then he says Jesus is going to be with them forever. That there is a union between the Holy Spirit and Christ, which is not a controversial doctrine within Christianity. I'm just supporting it from Scripture, because that's the view of the Trinity. So just based off his view of the Trinity, then we would add not just the Father and his Word, but the Holy Spirit as well would not have been created. But you know him because he resides with you and will be in you. And we have verse 19 through 21. In a little while the world will not see me any longer, but you will see me because I live. You will live too. You will know at that time that I am in my Father, and you are in me, and I am in you. So in these excerpts, we learn A, the Spirit is potentially eternal. B, he is an advocate like Jesus. And from verse 17 and 20, it appears that the Spirit's indwelling is equivalent to that of Christ. And C, we may add that the Spirit is also sent from the Father. John doesn't mention the Spirit, but does he think that the Spirit is also created? Presumably not. Further, the verse that Craig quotes presupposes temporality, like time. It says, in the beginning was the Word. So time is not said to be created by John. So my question is, what does John think about time? Right? What does Dr. Craig think John thinks about time. Is time a concrete entity, or is time an abstract entity? Right? Is it something that is in the world, is it something? Is it a measurement? Right? A measurement seems to be something abstract, right? That you create. Like I can create a measurement, inches. I can create a tool to measure other things, but that measurement is something abstract about the measurement, right? The quantities of the measurement seem to be uh, abstract themselves, like before and after. That those seem to be concepts that are implicit in time, right? It seems like you can't have time without having the concept of before and after. But is before something concrete? Is after something concrete? Or these ideas? And so if time itself is not said to be created, and time is an abstract entity, then it will follow that John presupposes one thing that does not that is not created, and that's time. It says that in the beginning. So there's the beginning with it's three things there. It's God, is His Word, and it's time. All those three things. So I wonder what Dr. Craig would say to that argument. I think it's a pretty good argument the way I framed it. But he did it. But he did like a long study on time, like the time, God, time, and eternity. So pretty sure he's prepared to answer that, and I'll probably see his response in the book as we continue to study. So he doesn't mention it in this section. Okay. Craig frames the question over whether John would include abstract objects in the category of things created by God. Craig states that we cannot know what he thought about many disputable. We cannot know what. Let me be more specific here. John thought about many disputable objects classified as abstract objects or constructs within theoretical physics today. But here the point about time remains. John could have used the prologue to his gospel to state that God created time as well, and it's not clear how he views time. So my point there is, John could have said, God created time and He created everything in it, right? That you can say that. You can use language to say that. That would clearly let you know that the relationship between God and time is one of creator-creature relationship. God created it. It's a thing that God created. What type of thing would it be if God created it? Would it be an abstract object? Would it be a concrete object? Is it concrete just because He created it? I think it would be concrete if He created it, because an abstract object is something that does not stand in causal relations. And if God causes something to be, then that thing is a concrete object. So maybe that would be his response. He would say, well, John, time itself is not an abstract object. Time is time is not an abstract object. Time is a concrete object. But then the question still remains that doesn't seem to be a creative act of God to create time in John's thinking. So now we see at least one thing that is a concrete object that God did not create, right? And that's time. So this kind of refutes the doctrine that that just abstract objects alone would be a problem, right? It would be a problem if time was a concrete object and it stood in causal relationships to things, and that God didn't create it, right? So that's even, it's kind of understandable to think why God wouldn't have created an abstract object, because they're abstract, right? It's like good, the idea of goodness. Like, did God create that idea? Did He say, okay, goodness is this and it's A and it's B and C put together, and that's what goodness is. And hang that idea somewhere in the world of the forms of Plato. And now when we think about goodness, we think about those and forms, and we are able to grasp those forms through our mind, because our minds are able to seek into this world of invisible forms and grasp knowledge, right? So is that what God did? I doubt it. That's all sheer speculation and all ad hoc, and there's nothing on the basis of scripture that would support such a view that I just articulated. Okay, however, in the prologue, we have John claiming that God created things in time. The nature of time remains undefined. It's interesting to note that Craig interprets John to hold that abstract objects would be created by God, a position that he argues elsewhere is circular. Okay, and that's what I have. That's what I have so far. So let's jump into. I need that last statement I made. I need to see now that I need to maybe that last statement, maybe quote the text. So I'm gonna go to the text. Okay, I'm here. What page was that? Okay, I'm gonna go to the page. Okay, I had to tell my kids to be quiet. Okay, let's see. This is the beginning where he's defining his terms. Okay, I think this is where we are. Oh. Seems like the text on different pages are in different places. Okay, so John never thought. Okay, this is what I was saying right here. Perhaps John had never thought about abstract objects, but by the same token, neither had John thought about quarks. Blah, 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 blah. If John would not have taken these sorts of unknown things to be uncreated, were he informed about them, why think that he would have exempted Platonic abstract objects? Okay, so maybe I just copy that. And then put this on my put this back on this page. Oh, maybe I add it to a footnote. Let's just do a footnote here. Okay. All right. One. Paste it there. And then now I need to cite my source. That's Craig 2016. No, page 15. So it's page 15. But when did he write this book? Okay, 2016, page 15. Okay. All right. Okay, so let's go back to the text and see what we can see here. Okay, so let's look and see what we have here. Okay, he says, okay, all right, so let's look and see what he says here. Recall that for the heavyweight Platonists, abstract objects and ordinary physical objects are on an ontological par, meaning they both exist, like they both exist in the same way. Or not, they don't have the same mode of existence, but they have the same quality of existence. They are equally as real. Platonist philosopher Mark Steiner emphasizes that natural numbers are objects in the same sense that molecules are objects. As the eminent Harvard philosopher W.V.O. Quine colorfully put it, numbers of all sorts, functions, and much else are as integral to the physical theory that uses them as are the atoms, the electrons, the sticks, for that matter, and the stones. Abstract entities may be even more remote from direct sense perception than micro entities, but they are, according to Platonism, just as real, so that if subatomic entities lie in the domain of if subatomic entities lie in the domain of, let's see, John's quantifiers, so do numbers. Okay? So I'm wondering if he's setting up, it looks like he's trying to set up an implication. So if he's trying to, but I don't know where he's going yet, so I don't know, I'm not going to add this. I'll see where he's going first, and then make it this entire section a point, summarize it into this point. So if abstract got, okay, the question then is not what John thought lay in the domain of his quantifiers. Rather, the question is whether John intends his domain of quantification, once God is exempted, to be unrestricted. Did he think that apart from God, everything else that exists has been created by God? Did he believe that God is the only uncreated reality? It is more than probable that he did. For God's status as the only eternal uncreated being is an earmark of first century Judaism, which is the backdrop against which the New Testament was written. Okay, so so I'm going to add to here Dr. Craig argues that the New Testament has a theological backdrop that entails that God, the sole and uncreated being. Okay, he writes. Okay, so now we're going to quote the text. Why am I quoting here? It seems like when you say that a person's view is when we're trying to say what a person's view is, then that's a point where you need to where you just need to quote them so that you won't be accused of misrepresenting them, etc., etc. So let's look at this. Where did he say that at? A guy's status as the only eternal uncreated being is an earmark of first century Judaism, which is the backdrop. Okay, so let's put that, copy it, come back to our text. He writes, okay, put that there. Create 2016 page. What page was this? 15? This is 15. Page 16. Okay, so then we can continue with this text. Okay. In his influential work on the character of ancient Jewish monotheism, Richard Bauckham identifies two characteristics that uniquely mark off Israel's God from all others, namely that he is creator of all things and sovereign ruler of all things. Richard Bauckham. Oh, I think this Bauckham guy is recently heard. I wonder if this is the same. Yeah, I think I heard a debate with Michael Lacona recently on the Capturing Christianity channel, and he was mentioning that he doesn't agree with Bauckham. I wonder if this is the same Bauckham, but God crucified in Jesus and the God of Israel. Citing Bauckham's work, Chris Tilling reports that the majority of scholars find in early Judaism a strict monotheism that draws a sharp line between God and everything else. Chris Tilling, problems with Ehrman's interpretive categories, and Michael L. Bird, how God became Jesus. Right. Right. So my question is this word thing, right? The word thing, if you say that someone says, if Dr. Craig wants to say, well, the work of someone shows that the early Jews put a sharp distinction between God and everything else. What did they think a thing was, right? Did they think an idea was a thing? Right? That seems like a Platonic a philosophical concept, right? Uh, do we want to attribute to them having notions of even an awareness of the question of whether ideas were things, or were they thinking in purely concrete terms, is in terms of right? So I guess that's what I'm saying. Like, are they were they thinking? Were they even aware that there were abstract objects, or did they have that concept? Right? Because if they didn't have the concept of an abstract object, then it's anachronistic to look back and say they showed that God showed a distinction between God and everything else. Well, that may be true, but was that distinction a one of abstract objects? Or was it to say that like concrete objects that can stand in causal relationships were all dependent on God, and He was the only concrete thing that is not dependent on anything else. So it's not clear. So I guess I'll make that note. Let me. That seems like a good note to add here. But let's keep reading. Judaism's on John's. Judaism on John's day, a bright dividing. Judaism of John's day, a bright divide. I need to go back. There is, namely, that He is creator of all things and sovereign ruler of all things. Okay, there is in the Judaism of John's day a bright dividing line which separates God ontologically from everything else, a bifurcation which Balcom attempts to capture by the term transcendent uniqueness. Balcom observes that so-called intermediate figures in Judaism fall into one of two categories. One, beings which are supernatural but nonetheless created like angels, and personifications of aspects of God Himself which have no independent existence, such as God's Word and God's wisdom. God's status as the sole ultimate reality comes to practical expression in the Jewish restriction of worship as properly directed towards God alone. According to Balcom, this restriction most clearly signaled the distinction between God and all other reality. Okay, so God's status as the sole ultimate reality comes to practical expression in the Jewish restriction of worship as properly directed towards God alone. According to Balcom, this restriction most clearly signaled the distinction between God and all other reality. Okay, so what does Dr. Craig say here? I'm going to walk it back. Okay. He's mentioned that God is the creator of all things. The Jewish background is that God is the creator and ruler of all things. He mentioned that okay. Just thinking about it. So I want to say that he argues that the So I said, Craig argues that the Jewish understanding of God as the creator and ruler of all things is the underlying principle of Jewish monotheism. Okay. There is a bifurcation between okay. So this is kind of my summary of what he said. Craig argues that the Jewish understanding of God as the creator and ruler of all things is the underlying principle of Jewish monotheism. There's a bifurcation between unembodied spirits and God's personified attributes and worship of God. And I'm going to say the worship of God. These intermediaries, angels and say wisdom, for example, are never rendered worship according to Craig's reading of Balkum. That's kind of weird wording. Like, I struggle with wording things correctly. I said I struggle. I just don't like it. I don't have a paradigm. Maybe I need to look at my book on where it gives these different type of sentence stems, and then you can just memorize those sentence stems. And each time you write the sentence, use one of them to kind of guide your, give your sentences better structure. Try to write in the active voice and avoid the passive tense. But, oh my God, I suck at that. I'm just like a passive voice writer criminal. Okay, so he's argued so far that the backdrop of New Testament theology was Jewish theology, which held that God was a unique, sole unique being. He only received worship, so on and so on. Okay? So what I want to say here is that although Bauckham says that their view was that God was unique and different from all of the things, it's not clear what their ontology was. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Ooh, that's good. That's a good way to put that. Let's see how he spells Barkham, so I'm not... Oh, yeah, I was screwing his name. Barkham. Oh, I did spell it correctly. Huh. Okay, so assuming that Craig and Barkham are correct, and maybe okay. So I guess that's what I want to say about it. Assuming that Craig and Barkham are correct, it may be true that the Jewish tradition saw God as distinct from all other entities, but this doesn't tell us how they conceived of an entity, right? So if they say God is distinct from all other things, well, what is a thing? Some you can spiritual things and spiritual things, and this rock, that's a thing, and this mountain, that's a thing. So people are things, but you have things that have bodies, things that don't have bodies. God is a thing. Is God a thing? Well, God is not a thing. A thing has to be created, right? So if they define things in terms of whatever was created, then we still can't infer their ontology, like what they thought, what types of things they thought existed, right? And so, will they even believe in abstract objects, right? Don't know. Would they have updated their ontology if they became aware of abstract objects? Would they have went the route of let's say Augustine, who said that these abstract objects are thoughts in God's mind, which is, does God create his thoughts? Is he like, let there be my thoughts? Or does he just have thoughts, and then does he have thoughts like human beings? Is it a stream of consciousness, or is it just one picture of reality? So these questions isn't clear. So just this alone is not a strong argument for what he's trying to prove, and that's that John would have considered everything outside of God to be created by God. So I don't see the strength of this so far, but maybe it'll get stronger. Let's go back to it. It is interesting that, like John, I don't know where is it. It is interesting that, like John, Balcom makes no explicit mention of abstract objects. Okay, that's the point I just made. As a biblical scholar rather than a philosopher, he may be completely unaware of such objects. Okay, that's the point I'm making. Nevertheless, it is obvious that he reads the Jewish text. He cites as unrestricted in their domain of quantification once God is exempted. For example, he writes, "This God of Israel is the one and only creator of all things and sovereign Lord over all things." Among the many other things that late Second Temple period Jews said about the uniqueness of their God, these two aspects of his unique relationship to all other reality were the most commonly cited, repeatedly used to put Yahweh in an absolutely unique category. He is the creator of all things. And that puts him into is the one and the only creator of all things, and sovereign Lord over all things. Good. One and only creator of all things, and sovereign Lord over all things. Balcom takes these Jewish texts to distinguish God from all the rest of reality. Now that's a jump. Dr. Craig jumps. Dr. Balcom just said that God, that's a leap, right? He's the creator of all. Hold on, let me see. To all other reality. No, that's what he said. These two aspects of his unique relationship to all other reality were the most commonly cited, repeatedly used to put Yahweh in an absolute unique category. Okay. So reality. What does reality consist of? Right? That's your ontology. So just because he says reality, doesn't mean that he still has that they have a view. The Jewish people who he's studying, doesn't mean that they had a view of abstract objects, right? Because if that's not then their ontology, then given their ontology, their claims hold, right? So if they didn't believe in abstract objects, then given that they just believed in concrete objects, God was just uniquely in that place as the creator. And then even if they did consider abstract objects to exist, they exist. Let's say abstract objects like the forms of like things that God thinks about, and which is Aristotelian, seems like God thinks about these things. Those are the forms of the things that God thinks about. Okay, and what am I trying to say? Let's say the forms are the things that God thinks about. So he doesn't create them. However, all other things, concrete things, are created. And then, but then the forms would not be abstract in that sense. Then they would be concrete because they would stand in a causal relation. Would God be caused to think about these things, or if he wasn't caused to think about, would he be the cause of these things, and that he's thinking about them? So then those abstract objects wouldn't be abstract anymore. They would be concrete objects, and they would be thoughts within the mind of God. So then if that's their solution, then they would say, although God does not create everything because he doesn't create his thoughts. It's not like a time where he doesn't have a thought, then a time when he does have a thought, that would be like a new thought, a change. Maybe his beliefs change, but his thoughts intrinsic to his mind, or are they exterior? Does he have some thoughts necessarily? Does he have some thoughts accidentally? But if he knew he was going to have that thought, then that thought that I'm going to have this thought, I don't know. Maybe I'm aimless in my analysis. I don't know well. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'm just seeing what I can kick back on in Dr. Craig's writing. What I can play devil's advocate against. Okay, so Balcom takes these Jewish texts to distinguish God from all the rest of reality, and the majority of scholars have concurred in Balcom's exegesis of these texts. The crucial point here is that the unrestrictedness of the domain of quantification is based not in what kinds of objects were thought to lie in the domain, but rather in the Jewish doctrine of God as the only being which exists eternally, and I say, independently of the existence of anything else. It is who or what God is that requires that the domain of quantification to be unrestricted. Whatever beings might be discovered to lie in the domain. So he's saying it is what God is, who or what God is. He's the only being that is, he's the only being He's the only being that is the creator of all things and that exists eternally and independently of everything. Okay? So God created them on the by experience. So his point is that, Dr. Craig's point is that it is who or what God is that requires that the domain of quantification be unrestricted. Whatever beings might be discovered to lie in the domain. Okay, so that he creates is unrestricted without him, which means everything. So he's saying it's the definition of God. It's what God is. God is it's his essence that requires that he be the creator and sustainer of everything. Okay. This is that's a okay, all right. I guess I'm thinking about the who or what God is that requires that he be that the domain be restricted without him. Because I'm thinking about parts and wholes, right? I'm thinking about parts of God, like thoughts. Thoughts wouldn't be, God wouldn't be identical to his thoughts, but they would belong to him in a thinker thought relationship. The thought is what is thought by the thinker, right? So you have thinker and you have thought. But the thought is, I guess, dependent on the thinker, and the thinker isn't dependent on the thought. So that would be a relationship of dependence. But then it depends on the nature of the thought. So these thoughts, does the guy have any eternal thoughts, right? If God has eternal thoughts, then thoughts that don't have a time, that thoughts that he's always thinking, that kind of thing, then you have something that is not created, but that is still dependent on God, right? So it's but then you would have a thing that God is not the creator of, right? So because in order to be created, there has to be a point where you don't exist, or it doesn't, whatever the thing is, it doesn't exist, right? So what am I trying to say? The crucial point here is that the unrestricted of the domain of quantification is based not in what kinds of objects were thought to lie in the domain, but rather in the Jewish doctrine of God as the only being which exists eternally, and I say independently of others. Okay, so the thought would be eternal, but not I say. Okay, so here, okay, I'm going to copy this. Okay. Okay, so Dr. Craig I forgot to put I believe my parentheses goes inside my quotation marks. I'll figure it out later. I'm not editing this right now, but still. No, I think my parentheses actually goes outside the period, but inside the quotation mark. Maybe. Just gonna copy this. Paste it down here. What page am I on? I'm on page 17. Okay, page 17. Okay. So what point was... So let's go back. But here the point remains. Okay, so here he was trying to figure out, did John think that if God is excluded in a category of all things, there was anything in that category that was not... Hold on, let's see. Just go back. Dr. Craig argues that the Jews... Craig argues that these intermediaries... going to say... Okay. I got to go back to the text because he says it. He said the question then is not what John thought lay in the domain of his quantifiers. Rather, the question is whether John intends his domain of quantification once God is exempted to be unrestricted. Okay. Okay. So, all right. So let's see. I want to draw some implications about this point in Dr. Craig. Okay. If Dr. Craig is correct here, okay, so I put here, if Dr. Craig is correct here, then the Jewish ontology cannot include anything besides God that is independent of God and eternal. Something may be eternal and dependent on God, like eternal concepts within the mind of God, but not independent as well. Thus, the view of divine conceptualism, where abstract objects are taken to be the products of God's mind or mental activity. I didn't complete the sentence. Consistent the ancient Jewish conception of God. So okay, so here's the point I'm trying to make. It's kind of getting lost in some of the my own thoughts, losing the point and the issue. A good debate tactic. What I've observed is sticking to your argument and sticking to the argument and not losing sight of the argument, because that can make you feel lost, like mentally. So if Dr. Craig is correct here, then the Jewish ontology cannot include anything besides God that is independent of God and eternal. Something may be eternal and dependent on God, like eternal concepts within the mind of God, but not independent as well. Thus, the view of divine conceptualism, where abstract objects are taken to be the products of God's mind or mental activity, is consistent with this ancient Jewish conception of God. Platonism, as a view of God, view of abstract objects as eternal and independently existing, is inconsistent with this view. But if their ontology wouldn't be unrestricted, given the knowledge of the doctrine of Plato's forms, then Platonism isn't inconsistent with ancient Jewish thought. Okay, so what am I saying here? I'm saying if they would have changed their minds, had they known what abstract objects were, not changed their minds, but if they would have been like, oh, well, that's not something God created, right? Then they would, if a knowledge of Platonism would have changed their view of God, then it's what am I trying to say? It seems like had they known, it's possible that they would have come to know about like Platonism and said, oh, properties and all those kind of things, and be like, well, how can God create a property? And they could have came to the same conclusion like we come to, like many Christians come to, like that's not something God creates. But it can't be independent of God. right? So it seems like Christians come to that. So, right? So it seems like they would have. I can't conclude that these Jews would that their domain is unrestricted as far as all things were created by him, right? What does he mean by things, right? And if creation involves, so I guess that's what I'm trying to say. What is creation, right? If their anthropology wouldn't be unrestricted given the knowledge of the doctrine of Plato's forms, then Platonism is inconsistent with ancient Jewish thought. That is, if if there are uncreated things that are dependent on God, in the domain of unrestricted Okay, so I guess what I'm trying to say is, if there is something, so he's trying to say that the Jewish concept of God is that God created everything, right? And then he's trying to say that, well, the question is, if you take God out of the domain of all things, right? All things were created by him. Is it restricted or unrestricted? Right? I'm saying that if there is something besides God that is not created, then obviously that domain is restricted. That's what I'm trying to say. So it wouldn't, in this case, it wouldn't matter if they meant abstract objects to be created or whatever. These things could have been concrete objects, right? They could have been concrete. Things like propositions and numbers could have been considered concrete, but eternal, because God is thinking these things, and that therefore here's something that has a dependence on God, but it is a part of God. As such, it is not God. It's not identical with God, but it is still something that's not created. So there are things outside this domain of created things. So all things would be created. I guess that's what I'm trying to say here. Okay. Good look at my time here. Okay. So I've been going for quite some time. I can't see I think I've grasped what I was trying to say here at this last point. Uh, okay, and he said that's the question. So he was trying to see if that's the question, and he was trying to say, well, the Jews kind of felt like, everything was created by God. He's the creator of all things and ruler of all things. And whether or not they knew about the abstract objects, they still said that everything in the domain excluding God is created, right? That's the view. But what does that mean? And is that, I guess my question would be not just what was the New Testament backdrop, but would John, is it true, right? Is it true? And what do they mean? They can't mean that that all things were created, right? It depends on what they mean by thing. Okay, that's my second point. Is a thought of God a thing? Does a thought of God exist? Right? What is meant by a thing? Right? If also, let me put this. How can I say this? Depend on one's definition. The word thing. All right? Because okay, so because if God has eternal thoughts and these thoughts are things, then it seems to follow that there are uncreated things that depend on God for their existence. So the claims of the Jews would be right in a sense, but wrong in another. It would be right in the sense that it would be right in the sense that God is the source of all things, right? So that, but not the creator of all things. Right? Some things aren't created. I guess some things aren't created, right? That's my idea, right? And this it seems like, what is a thing too? We have to define this, because I don't think Dr. Craig defines what a thing was in his introduction. Let's look and see. No, he doesn't define what a thing is. What does it mean to be a thing? right? And that goes back to what does it mean for something to exist? And no, I don't think he defines a thing. So whether he's right is going to depend on how we define things. Let's say a person within the Trinity. Let's say Jesus, the second person of the Trinity. Is that a thing? Like, does the second person of the Trinity exist? I don't want to say does he have independent existence, because we know God is one, right? But is it true that the second of the person that that a person is a part of God, right? So Jesus is a part of God. Let's say that part. Is that part eternal? Is that part created? No. So God will have a part that is eternal and uncreated, but is dependent on God. Right? And when I say God there, I don't mean a person, I mean the Trinity. Right? The essence of God is what gives the persons their existence. Right? So the persons exist in terms of their essence. Man, as you can see, this is very. But I hope I was able to illuminate and to articulate the complexity of thought that is here, and I feel like I did. Maybe wrong, but I feel like I was able to outline some thoughts, and been going here now for an hour and 30 minutes, so this will be a super long video, but it's a part of the process, and I'm going to be coming live all this week, working on this paper, trying to digest these thoughts. I love it because it's pulling me. It's calling me to exhaust myself mentally. And so I feel as though Dr. Craig wants to say that the view that Platonism, the view that these are their eternal, independent things, is contradicted, because John sees all things to God to be the only thing that is eternal and has an independent being. Then the question is, well, does John what would John say about abstract objects? Would he think abstract objects themselves would have to have would have to be created? Well, that he doesn't phrase it like that. He says, is it unrestricted? Well, by definition, an abstract object could not be considered by John to have been created, because an abstract object is eternal, and it's abstract, meaning it doesn't stand in a causal relationship. So how could, you would think if John understood that, then he wouldn't. But I'm getting back on. I'm getting back into my analysis. But thank y'all for joining me. If you watch this, I'm gonna put it up anyway, because I'm just gonna share it. But it's a long video. I know I enjoy it. I'm gonna do it again just because I enjoyed it. But I enjoyed doing this, and this was motivation for me to do it. This is like, my channel is almost like it's autobiographical in the sense of my intellectual development. I'm just kind of like putting that out there. That's a piece of what I'm doing on this channel. I am doing some educational pieces, because it's education with the content that I'm introducing you to, that I'm breaking down. I'm studying with you, so it's a studying resource. It's a library, my channel. It's an example of how to become a scholar. Eventually, when I'm a scholar, I will have, you know, had that example on this channel. The tracks that I went to get here. You seeing me writing. You seeing me breaking down the information. You seeing how I think about this information. Uh, and for anyone who wants to be something in life and has a dream and a goal and a purpose and don't know how to reach it, and you want to be a scholar specifically, hopefully I can be an example for someone in the future, and that's why I'll keep doing this. But thank you if you've watched to this point. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. Thank you, David Alvarez. You always seem to watch my videos and comment. Thank you. I appreciate your support. But with that said, let's end it. Thank you guys. Bye bye. I'm the Thought Decoder here. I teach you logic. I teach you how to state and clearly defend your fate. This is my journey to become a scholar. Thank you for coming along the journey. And you have a great day. And remember to